Welcome to the Warriors Watch podcast. I am Danny Leroux, your host, and so happy to be with you for this episode. I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to do an episode on what I jokingly called the game of the century on a couple of radio appearances over the last couple days, because the Celtics were on a 13-game win streak, the Warriors were on a 7-game win streak, and it lived up to that sarcastic fake billing. It was a phenomenal game. Celtics ended up winning 92-88, and the person I wanted to talk with about it is Jared Weiss. Jared is the editor of Celtics Wire, and he does work for CLNS Media. I've known him for years, and he was at the game at the Garden, and we talk about a lot of different things, including some like the Jaylen Brown story that I didn't know at all until after the game, which is pretty remarkable. We talk about that, and talking with Jared, there is a little bit more of a Celtics twinge to it, but he was objective, and I think his insight on the Warriors is very, very good. So I think you'll enjoy it. We talk, of course, about the officiating. It's something I brought up to him. I shared my own thoughts, and then everything that went on with the game, which I think was characterized by defense. This episode has a sponsor. The sponsor is MyBookie. You can go to mybookie.ag, and then you enter the promo code WATCH50, WATCH, and the number 5, number 0, like Warriors Watch. And the reason why it's 50 is because you get a 50% deposit bonus. So that's why it's Watch 50. And this podcast runs about 25 minutes. It was one of the hardier ones in terms of a game recap, but there was a lot to go through. So I hope you really enjoy it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, what a night. What a night.
It really was. And I'm sure there's a section of the population, especially who are listening to this podcast, who many of them probably have a specific rooting interest, who didn't enjoy this game as much as I think you and I did. But you and I both appreciate really good defense. And I think that was the biggest story of this game, was that these are two of the most talented defensive teams in the league. And for most of the game, that's what ruled the day.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, Golden State's defense was just so insanely good for a significant portion of this game. And all of us that are covering the Celtics were looking around going holy crap, we've been watching a good defense in Boston, but Golden State is just insane. I mean, they all the things that Boston does, all their core competencies on the defensive end, Golden State can do at just another level that's just even more intimidating. And they were just completely suffocating Boston's offense. And Stevens has this really annoying quirk where he keeps making amazing adjustments in the middle of the game and beating every single team. It's just driving everyone crazy. And so he basically just went to 90s basketball and just ran the entire fourth quarter out of the post. And that somehow worked against Golden State. So, maybe the Celtics should sign Kevin McHale again and just run out of the post with him. I don't know what the solution is going to be long term, but he figured it out. And I still am I'm completely beside myself that they somehow pulled this game out.
Yeah, it was weird in a couple different ways, because you saw some of the hallmarks of the Warriors. I mean, they had a big run, I think that was in the second quarter, where they took control, and then Boston had a big push at the end of the second to cut it to 5, when the Warriors had been up double digits for a lot of that quarter. And then in the third, they pushed the lead again, this kind of the becoming standard Warriors big third quarter push. And then what I think was the definitive stretch of that game, well, there were two big moments that happened in the third quarter. One was Curry picking up 3 fouls in a little over 3 minutes. And then the second part was, even in that next middle stretch when Curry was out, they were okay. But then that end of the third quarter, Boston completely took control, despite Kyrie Irving being off the floor.
Yeah, they go on that 19-0 run, they starting about halfway through the third quarter there, and it was just transition pressure from Boston. That's when they're at their best. That is something that was their core identity 2 years ago. They got away from that last year because they wanted to get better as a half-court executing offensive team. Now they're basically trying to take that next leap where they're both a high-paced team that has really good execution, trying to basically be what the Warriors are. And they showed it in the third quarter there. I mean, Jaylen, I'm sure we'll get to him at some point in greater detail with what is, as far as a narrative, one of the most remarkable nights I've seen in a long time, which, although sadly it's not the first time this has happened, covering the Celtics, which is really sad. But he was just explosive. He played incredible defense on Kevin Durant in the third quarter, at least. And Boston just kept forcing turnovers. And they did, it's they shot 33% in this game, and it was, I think, the second time they've ever made a comeback of this nature against a team that is good with that poor of a shooting percentage. And frankly, there's no possible way you should ever be able to beat the Warriors shooting that poorly, but they just tried to maximize the number of possessions that they could have, and they're trying to win this war of attrition, and that's how they actually got by in the third.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a couple different things in terms of the Warriors. The Warriors had massive struggles from three themselves, but a lot of that should be attributed to Boston playing good defense. Did a nice job contesting shots, and by virtue of switching more often, which they do, like the Warriors do, you give up fewer kind of seams is the word I usually use for it. You give up fewer lanes for it to be wide open. And so, there were a couple, like Clay hit one at one point that was wide open. There were a few others, but by and large, those looks were more contested than they are usually. And you could make a fair argument that more of those shots should have gone in for both teams, but it wasn't so egregious when you consider the better contest than usual.
Yeah, I mean, Brad was pretty, he usually readily admits when he gets lucky that the team's missed a few shots. I mean, Clay got a good look at the end of the game that could have, they could have sent it to overtime, or actually might have been to take the lead if I'm not mistaken at the end there. So, Boston got really lucky from that perspective. Golden State going to their split actions on the elbows with using Clay and KD, which still blows my mind as someone doesn't get to watch the Warriors every single time. But they were able to work those actions. Boston, one of the things that's been, I think, relatively unique for their defensive scheme is that the way that they switch functions almost as a zone when covering kind of like the weak side area or side pick and rolls and stuff like that. So they're really good at communicating switches, not as the immediate call, like this is how we're defending the pick and roll, but rather, especially when Horford's in there, who's a brilliant defender, is basically being able to read whether or not they're going to be able to ice or go over on a screen, and then instead switching about half a second into the play. And that allows them to stay grounded on the shooters so that they don't let Clay get loose or let Curry get loose, and that worked pretty well. And while Durant went pretty insane for a few moments in this game, I think they generally were able to prevent Golden State from getting, just from being able to pass themselves into wide open looks.
One of the most surprising parts of this game for me was that, by and large, the Warriors this season have had their best moments with a lot of their best players on the floor without Zaza Pachulia. The starting five has been fine, but I mean, you're playing 4 All-Stars, so it's not a big surprise that the starting five does well. But it's been, the pushes late in the third when Pachulia comes out, or sometimes late in the first or the fourth quarter, wherever they need it. In this game, the best moments that they had, by and large, were when Pachulia was out there. They had a push at the very beginning, and then they had a push in the third quarter. And that was just so unusual. It's not really what this team does well. JaVale struggled especially that he was on the floor for that big part of that third quarter, for a portion of that third quarter run. He was only on the floor for 2 minutes. And Boston just did better in unusual stretches, and I think some of that is also related to the personnel that they had out there. And starting five versus starting five, I think the Warriors have an advantage without Gordon Hayward, but I think Stevens did a better job putting lineups out there that could compete.
Yeah, I mean, Boston's been playing better with their 1.5 units, even more so, really. They're just consistently good when they start digging into their bench. And that's one of the things that's allowed them to win a lot of these games, is that they remain at a consistent competency on offense throughout the game. They don't have those major dry spells. So, I think it's mostly just that they had lineups out there that they could get into. They could really get into the transition for. I haven't had a chance to rewatch the game yet, so we'll have to re-record this answer tomorrow and somehow edit into everyone who's already downloaded the pod. But I would say that the one thing that I did like that I think Golden State was able to force down their throats is that Golden State was using Draymond to just kind of stampede them. And Boston just couldn't really handle that. And I would imagine in a rematch, they're probably going to try to really hammer that home. Because while they were better with Zaza out there, I think it was mostly that Draymond just had a little more freedom to kind of run with the ball.
Before Jared and I finish our conversation about Celtics Warriors and that fabulous game, I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor, MyBookie. So it is very important for those of you who choose to wager on sports, not only to make the right bets, of course, that's exceedingly important, but also to make sure that you're betting at the right place. And mybookie.ag is definitely the place for you to go. And so they have a wonderful app, and you can go for all sorts of things. And one of the other big parts of any outlet for this is the payout structure. And so they do super fast payouts, so you don't have to worry about your money getting all tied up. And so this is a great time of year for that, because not only do you have basketball in full swing, you have good games every day, but you also have football going on. Bowl season is pretty close, and then the NFL is still going on strong. And so there are a lot of different things that you can check out. Really, whatever your interests are in this, they have something to cover you. Whether you're somebody who's into the money lines or sides or totals, whatever makes you interested, there is something for you on mybookie.ag. And also, there's a way for you to do that while supporting the show. So the way it works is you go to mybookie.ag and then use the promo code WATCH50, WATCH, and then the number 5 and the number 0. And that's watch because of Warriors Watch, and then 50 because what you get by entering that promo code is you get a 50% deposit bonus on that deposit. So it's pretty awesome. And you put in money and you get more money. And so again, it's mybookie.ag, and then the promo code to tell them you came from us and to get that 50% deposit bonus is WATCH50, WATCH 50. Mybookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid. The way that most teams have handled that is just giving Pachulia less respect and giving him less room. And I was surprised Boston didn't shift from that. But I mean, you have so many other guys on the floor that I do kind of understand it in that way. And I think that Boston, they didn't attack that in the same way. And again, it's not a big deal. It's not, didn't almost cost them the game or anything crazy like that. But something else that was strange about Golden State's play was the way that they ran certain parts of the rotation. So Curry being in foul trouble in the third messed some things up. They also played Livingston. McCaw got a DNP in this game. They played Livingston with the second unit, which actually did all right. But then they, just kind of one of those weird things that Kerr does. Omri Caspi has been largely out of the rotation in key moments of this season. He's had a couple nice plays. Then he's on the floor for 7.5 minutes in the fourth quarter of this game.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a reporter sitting next to me about why isn't McCaw playing and why isn't Caspi playing, who of course got out there in the fourth. It's weird. There doesn't seem to be a clear consistency to the rotations with Golden State that I felt like I could identify in years past with them. So I need your input on that. But, it's one thing that Stevens does is Stevens does not respect the hot hands. He has his game plan set in stone, and he's not really veering away from it unless foul trouble happens. Obviously, that was one of the major storylines for this game, besides the fact that Steph just wasn't quite himself because he's just returning from injury in this game. But, not having Steph out there for that huge stretch of the third quarter, obviously, kind of screwed up their rotation.
It did, but also Kerr has these problems. And something that I noticed, especially in that third quarter, was I thought David West played really well in this game when he was out there. And Kerr basically refuses to play him in the first or the third quarter. And part of what those lineups have used, especially with the part that Curry was out there for, is the Warriors' backups don't really space the floor that much. And so you can survive that with good defense like they did in the second. And then the hot hand thing actually reared its head, and I had forgotten about this as being as big a moment as it was. But it was in the middle of the fourth quarter. The second unit had played reasonably well, and Kerr kept them out there despite Curry missing a ton of time due to foul trouble. And Durant, and so Kerr left his backups largely in the game. Stevens went to Kyrie and Horford, and then I think it was like a 4-0 or 6-2 run that Boston did before he was able to get Durant in. And those sorts of things are mistakes that a coach as intelligent as Kerr should not make, because that the reason your guys were doing well, it was in no small part because Boston's best offensive players were not on the floor.
Yeah, and just from the perspective of the team that I cover, it's like with Stevens, when he sees the other team switching their units, he throws his guys back in there. He wants to match units. He wants to maintain the matchups that he's game planned for. And a hot hand, while I'm someone that does not believe that the hot hand is a fallacy from the simplicity of just feeling your shot that time, I think it generally is from the perspective of just a single unit getting a string of plays in a row, unless they're running in transition and forcing turnovers. But if you're executing well in the half court, that can pretty much snap at any minute. And if you didn't align your subs the way you're supposed to, then you're losing a huge amount of opportunity towards later in that next quarter to maximize the play of your top players. And I think it definitely seems like that happened tonight, because it didn't seem like Durant quite had enough time to really work, be able to basically work his matchups.
Yeah, I thought that was a problem. I think my favorite stat from this game is that both teams contested around 80% of the other team's shots. That is astonishingly high. And when you consider that both teams ran a few times to success, like the percentage of half-court shots that were contested in this game was probably around 90%. It might have even been higher than that.
I would love to know what that is relative to the NBA record, because I've never seen a game where just about literally every shot was contested. So that's pretty remarkable to hear.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, so both teams, the full stats on that, both teams contested, and this is according to SportView data, which it's pretty hard to fudge. The Warriors contested 66 shots, and the Celtics contested 65, and so they each took, I think, they were each in the like high 70s, low 80s in terms of attempts, which is also super low. And part of that is, getting back in transition defense, and generally also when you have good half-court defenses, you run the shot clock more because you can't get anything early. And so I think that was another standard part of this game. And another just important part, Boston didn't get to the free throw line a single time in the first quarter. And then they got there 13 times in each of the second and third, and then I think it was 12 in the fourth quarter. And so they were able to do that, and the Warriors weren't able to get to the line with any consistency. And then the other unusual part is they missed a lot of the shots once they got there. Yeah,
I mean, the Warriors were running most of their actions to try to get three-point looks, while towards the end of the game, Boston was just trying to attack. I mean, they just wanted to get to the line. They wanted, they obviously wanted to get Thompson or Curry to foul out, ideally. But Kyrie gets a lot of flack for not drawing free throws, especially not at the rate that like Isaiah Thomas did last year. I think one of those reasons is that Isaiah's whole game was he just like launched himself into defenders and got the call, while Kyrie just kind of magically sidesteps or fades behind defenders to get a shot off, so he's not going to draw fouls as much. But tonight he ripped off the mask, but put his life on the line, as I joked, and he basically later actually said, and he just started attacking Zaza with all those sharp elbows and sharp knees all over the place. And he just wanted to get to the line. Jaylen Brown was doing the same thing. Jason Tatum was doing the same thing. I guess it was just a kind of a key part of the game plan for them, was just in the fourth quarter, they wanted to attack the rim as much as possible, and it worked.
Since I know Warriors fans were complaining about it during the game, you were there. Obviously, you're objective, but you come at it from a different perspective. What did you think of the officiating in this game?
Not pretty. That's for sure. I mean, this was a very, this was like a 90s throwback. This was like watching the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Baltimore Ravens in the 2000s. I mean, this was a great defensive lockdown physical game, which I absolutely loved. It's a great change of pace from the stuff that we're used to seeing, mostly finesse ball. So I very much enjoyed it. There were a lot of weird calls. But like the Celtics fans lose their minds all the time over calls that are, for the most part, correct. Like the Marcus Smart offensive interference call, which was one of the easiest calls ever made in NBA history, and Celtics fans thought that was the most egregious thing that's ever happened to them. And I'm sure Tommy Heinsohn was punching a table somewhere when he saw that. But I've always been of the opinion that if you really go back and watch the games that are known as poorly officiated, that both sides think that their side was the one that got screwed. And at the end of the day, usually it's completely even, regardless of whether or not they made a bunch of either under or overreactions on calls.
I thought it was a little bit in favor of the Celtics, not deliberately, I just think in that way, but it wasn't super egregious. And what was notable, other than the Kyrie call at the end, which I think was from the angles I saw was very dubious. A lot of the calls that were the most negative for the Warriors were not the bad calls. Like, I think that, all of three of Curry's fouls in the second quarter, when I rewatched them, they all seemed fine. I had no opposition to any of those. And there were a few, shooting fouls and things like that. But first of all, people who focus on the disparity between free throws, that's not a good way to do it, because Boston was a far more aggressive team. So my summary would be, there were some calls that I think were, I think the whistle was a little bit tilted, but I'm sure there are going to be some who cry foul on it a lot more, and I would not agree with them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, if you're at the game, you don't notice the bad calls as much unless they're going against the home team because you're not watching the replay over and over. You're not hearing the commentary, stuff like that. So I'm sure there's a bunch that I missed. I saw one look at the Kyrie foul, and I was surprised it was called a foul, but I didn't see it enough to really significantly question it. But from what I was saying tonight, and then applying it to most games, like the home team almost always gets a little bit more of an advantage when it comes to the officiating because of the natural tendency of how officiating and human beings work. So like,
right.
There's always going to be that slight bias towards the home team.
Well, and that's a part of it in the playoffs too. I mean, people talk about home court advantage in the playoffs a lot. Some of it, not all of it, a portion of it is refs just calling the game that way. That's often the way that it is. So I didn't know anything because I was doing the Twitter NBA show with Nate, and so we obviously were talking, so we're not listening to the commentary. I didn't know anything about Jaylen Brown's personal tragedy until after this game. And so while normally, that's more of a Celtics story, Jaylen did go to Cal, and so he's somebody that Bay Area people go through. So do you want to do kind of a 1 or 2 minute summary of everything that happened to him recently?
Sure. So, actually, I want to make sure I get all this right. So hold on. I have pulled over, and it's now technically safe for me to do this. So basically, I had found out about this a few hours before the game. I got a heads up on it, and I was surprised to find out that by the time that the game was over, still most people didn't know. But Jaylen's best friend from high school, his name was Trevin Steed. He passed away last night tragically. It was a sudden death. Same age as Jaylen. And obviously Jaylen is devastated as anybody would be when they lost their best friend. And it's not really even clear at this point what exactly happened. There's a rumor going around about the cause of death, which Jaylen said that he does not know the cause of death, so I'm not going to substantiate that rumor. And you can look it up if you want to. Well, I'm sure we'll find out in the coming days. But Jaylen found out about it, I believe, last night or this morning. But he was a couple hours before the game sitting there telling Brad Stevens, I can't do it. And Brad said, that's fine. This is more important than basketball. Don't play. Don't worry about it. And then Jaylen got a call from Mrs. Steed, the mother of the victim, and she encouraged him to play. And after that, he decided that he was going to give it a go, ramped himself up. Kyrie, before the game, gave him a spiritual speech about how this is a transition in the spirit and stuff of that nature, which most people will laugh at Kyrie. I'll plug myself here. Go read. I just wrote a big column on this on CelticsWire.com, a feature on the whole event and the whole night. And I thought Kyrie's words were actually pretty beautiful. But so Jaylen went out there and played with, he's an intense player. He's an aggressive, physical player. He tries to create something out of nothing all the time. He's tenacious and trying to get steals. Tonight was something unique and different from him. And I saw it as kind of an evolution for him in his career, as the moment where, especially because there's so much talk right now about how Jason Tatum looks like this future star, and I've been surprised to see that Jaylen Brown has gotten a little bit slighted in that just relative to Jason. But since I've been started scouting Jaylen Brown about a year and a half ago and started to really, after they drafted him, I see a lot of the tools to be a player similar to what Andre Iguodala was in his prime, and maybe even potentially better than that because of the way he's already shooting the ball from three. So tonight seemed like kind of a national coming out party for him to really emerge as a household name, or at least like an NBA fan's household name. So I don't know how it was perceived and promoted on the broadcast. It sounds like the broadcasters never actually talked about what was happening for him, so I'm sure the narrative probably didn't convey as much to like everybody watching. But the way that he played on both ends, the smothering defense on KD, obviously the LeBron-style tomahawk is exciting, but a lot of the other stuff that he does, he definitely has some very clear flaws to his game, and there definitely are questions to whether or not he can overcome them, like his ability to control his handle and pass out of bad situations, stuff like that. But he's showing that he makes up for it at a level that's going to allow him to be a potential all-star caliber player.
He had a big night in some ways that are harder to show up on the box score, too. I mean, the thing that I noticed most, this was the best game I've seen him play as a professional, and I didn't see him play a great game at Cal, so best game I've seen him play. And
I think it's his best of his career, actually.
And so he what was stood out was his defense was great, and so some of that, you could see it through, people focus on blocks and steals. He contested a ton of shots, and I was going to praise him for his defense in this. Then I looked it up. He contested 16 shots in this game, 8 twos and 8 threes. That's phenomenal. He was around
Holy
it,
crap.
and he also had one of the biggest plays of this game was an offensive rebound he got over or not over, but next to Draymond Green, which was completely out of his area. He just read the play, got all the way over there, and took it from Green. And when you have a game that was, yes, it ended up being 4, but it was functionally a 1-possession game, all of those things matter.
Yeah, it's like he's discussed as having poor basketball feel, and while I guess that's true from the ball handler perspective, stuff like that. He has incredibly high IQ, a great balance. He's able to make so many smart plays off of the ball on both ends, and I thought that was a great epitome of the player that he is. He's basically turning into a taller Marcus Smart who doesn't shoot 25% from the field, which is a pretty incredible player. It's not just the way that he flies at the boards, but I didn't realize he contested 16 shots. That's an insane number. But he is, not only does he contest the shots, he is very effective at contesting them without fouling. I just did a film study on Celtics Wire from their win against Toronto the other night, where he actually screwed up and got baited into fouling DeMar DeRozan a few times in the third quarter, and then redeemed himself at the end of the game, just completely smothering him on the potential game-tying shot to win the game. And he is able to contest the great scores like the guys that get separation for shots like Durant and DeRozan, because he's able to lean into them without falling over. He's getting a lot better at learning how to jump second, which is really crucial to not getting baited into pump fake fouls. And he's just so long and so athletic, and he has that great hairdo, which you get distracted staring at that while you're shooting, obviously. But he does all the little things at a pretty high level already, and he's like basically I think he's like 100 games or a little bit less of that into his career. I think he should be evaluated like a veteran entering his prime, but he's really only 22 years old.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And so on that line, Draymond also had 16 shot contests. So this is just one of those games. And also some of that was because both teams play some lineups that are not necessarily the greatest shooters. You had a lot of smart help defenders in this game. I thought Marcus Morris was all around the floor. And so you had all these different things that were kind of running together. And I thought it was a really, really intriguing game from that perspective. I don't want to read too much into it from either team's perspective. I don't think that's a wise idea. So you appreciate it for what it is, you enjoy it for what it is, and you move forward with the satisfaction that it was one of the games of the year.
I mean, this doesn't change my read that, which everyone else has, that Golden State right now is probably the best team that's ever lived, and the Celtics would probably get killed by them if they ever met in the finals, but it would not be probably as bad as it went for Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals last year.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's fair. And so thank you so much for taking the time. Always a pleasure to talk with you, my friend.
All right, I'm going to bed.
Thanks again to Jared Weiss for taking the time to come on. You can read his work as the editor of the Celtics Wire, which is a part of USA Today, and he also does a lot of work for CLNS Media, which this podcast as well as Real GM is affiliated with, which is great. And you can also follow him on Twitter at Jared Weiss NBA. That's JaredWeiss NBA. And this was an absolutely fascinating game, just with all the dynamics that were going into it. It ended up being a defensive struggle. You kind of thought, and especially early on when the Warriors were scoring reasonably well, thought maybe that wouldn't be the story of this game. That's where it ended up going. And despite losing the game, the Warriors moved into the top 5 in defense on including the glasses metrics, which takes out garbage time. Not that there was any garbage time in this game. And that's notable as they move into this step. And I wouldn't come away with this game feeling much worse about the Warriors because they'll take better shots. They'll make more of those shots than before. But they need to figure out some of these rotational issues. And for those of you who are subscribers to The Athletic, it's funny to put my thoughts on this game in player analysis, but I did that at certain moments, use some of those as opportunities to talk about, well, maybe this would work, maybe this wouldn't work, because that's a part of the Warriors story moving forward. So you can check that out too. Of course, this podcast, and then Nate Duncan and I also did a heavy portion of our podcast on this game as well. So if you want my input on it, if you want Nate's input, you can check that out as well. And I was also part of a Warriors roundtable at The Athletic before this game with Tim Kawakami, Marcus Thompson, and Anthony Slater, which was a lot of fun. And we went in some unusual directions, which I really did enjoy. We went with a different format this time, so I liked it. If you want to support this show, there are a lot of different ways you can do it. You can leave a rating, you can leave a review in the podcast player of your choosing. You can also subscribe, download every episode, tell your friends, tell anybody you like that you think might enjoy it. And with a relatively new podcast, though obviously Locked On Warriors has a brand that I was with, but this is my new thing, and so some people still don't know about it. So anything you can do that way. And then of course the other big thing you can do is you can check out our sponsors. So for this episode, that is mybookie.ag, and then what you do is you enter the WATCH50, WATCH50 as your promo code, and they will give you a 50% deposit bonus on your first deposit. So you should definitely check that out, especially if you feel so inclined, whether it's about the Warriors or something else. You can do all that through mybookie.ag. And if you have any feedback on the show, good, bad, or indifferent, Danny Leroux NBA at gmail.com, at Danny Leroux on Twitter. If you take the time to write it, I will take the time to read it, though I might not respond because my time is super busy. But I appreciate that. I appreciate everybody who came out to my 100 Things Warriors signing at Books Incorporated in Alameda. Had a really nice time talking with people, telling them about how the process of writing the book. I have another signing that's going to be December 2nd in Petaluma, Copperfield's Books, and I'm guessing I'll have one or two other things. It's just in the process. And I'll have other appearances. I did a bunch of radio the last couple days, and I've heartily enjoyed that, as I always do. So thank you so much for listening. Take care, and make it a great day.